Standard deviation is too high.
Take the shot!
I can't! I'll hit the civilians! Move! Get back inside, analyst. Go make coffee or something. This is men's work. Let go of the rifle! Let go of it now!
Wind is 42 knots, full value from the east.
The North Sea did not have waves. It had moving mountains of black water. From the steel grating of the helipad on the Valkyrie oil platform, Lena Kovic watched the approaching storm. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of violence. At 50 years old, Lena stood with a stillness that unnerved the roughnecks on the crew. She wore a stained gray parka, her hair pulled back in a severe, functional bun. To them, she was just the structural engineer sent from corporate to sign off on the platform's aging legs. "Hey, Grandma, you gonna stare at the rain or sign these papers?" The voice belonged to Foreman Griggs, a man whose belly hung over his belt like a sack of wet cement. Lena turned slowly. Her eyes were the color of the sea, gray, flat, and devoid of warmth. "The wind shear on the northeast strut is exceeding tolerance. Griggs, if this storm hits Category 1, the vibration alone will shear the bolts." "Whatever. Just sign it so we get paid." Before she could respond, the rhythmic thud-thud-thud of rotors cut through the wind. A dark shape materialized out of the rain. An MH-60 Black Hawk, running dark, no navigation lights. Lena's body reacted before her mind did. She shifted her weight, assessing cover, checking exits, old habits. She forced her muscles to relax. "You are an engineer. You are a civilian. You are not her anymore." The chopper hovered over the pad. Ropes dropped, fast roping. 6 figures slid down, hitting the deck with the heavy clomp of magnetic boots. U.S. Army Rangers. They moved with the aggressive energy of young men who had trained for war but hadn't yet learned to fear it. Leading them was a captain who looked like he'd been carved out of a recruiting poster. Square jaw, eyes bright with adrenaline, and an air of invincibility that Lena found exhausting. Captain Sterling. He marched up to Griggs, ignoring Lena completely. "Captain Sterling, 75th Ranger Regiment. We're commandeering this platform for a joint training exercise with NATO naval forces. Clear the deck." Griggs sputtered. "Training? In this weather? You crazy?" "It's not a request," Sterling barked. He turned, his eyes finally landing on Lena. He looked her up and down. Seeing the gray hair, the civilian parka, the lack of a weapon, he saw nothing. "Ma'am," Sterling said, his voice dripping with that specific kind of polite condescension men use for women they deem irrelevant. "You need to move below decks. This is going to get loud, and I don't want you slipping and breaking a hip." Lena felt a flicker of annoyance, a small ember in the ash of her soul. "Captain, the wind is gusting at 45 knots. Fast roping in these conditions puts your men at risk of swinging into the derrick. Your extraction window is closing in 3 minutes." Sterling laughed, a short, sharp bark. "I appreciate the concern, honey, but we're Rangers. We handle the weather. You handle the paperwork. Go find a safe corner and stay out of the way." He signaled his team. "Let's go. Set up the overwatch position on the upper gantry." Lena watched them move. They were sloppy. They were loud. They were spacing themselves too close together. One grenade, she thought. One grenade would take out 4 of them. She gripped her clipboard until the plastic creaked. This was the double bind. If she spoke up, she was the nagging civilian woman. If she stayed silent, they might die. She chose silence. For now. She walked towards the hatch, passing a young corporal struggling with a heavy sniper case, an XM 2010 enhanced sniper rifle. He slipped on the wet grating, nearly dropping the weapon. Lena reached out, steadying him with a grip of iron. "Watch your footing, son. That scope loses 0 if you drop it." The corporal looked at her, surprised by the strength in her hand. Thanks, ma'am." "Move," Sterling shouted from the gantry. Lena let go. She descended into the belly of the rig, the smell of oil and recycled air wrapping around her. But she didn't go to her cabin. She went to the server room. She needed to see what these boys were really doing here. Because Rangers didn't fast rope into a North Sea storm for training, and Lena Kovich, Master Chief, Navy SEAL, retired, knew a lie when she heard one. The server room was a refrigerator, humming with the white noise of cooling fans and the aggressive rattle of the storm vibrating through the bulkhead. Lena Kovich didn't look at the flashing lights of the racks. She was on her knees beneath the main console, her multi-tool clamped onto the fiber optic trunk line. She stripped the casing. Dark. "Hardline cut," she whispered to herself. It wasn't a rat chewing through a cable, and it wasn't storm damage. The cut was clean, diagonal, made with precise wire cutters, and it was done at the junction box, the one place that severed external communications while leaving the internal rig network alive for the attackers to use. This was a containment protocol. Lena stood up, her knees popping. She pulled a small, illegal radio scanner from her parka pocket, a relic she kept for monitoring structural frequencies, or so she told HR. She tuned it to the encrypted UHF band the Rangers were using. The encryption was standard NATO. Her scanner couldn't break the voice scramble, but it could read the signal strength and cadence. Click, click, click. Squelch breaks. Short, disciplined bursts of static. They were moving. Lena exited the server room, moving not with the heavy stride of a roughneck, but with the rolling gait of someone who had spent decades stalking on uneven terrain. She moved toward the control room on the upper deck. The rig was a maze of steel grating and yellow handrails, a closed circle suspended above a freezing hell. She reached the junction leading to the main corridor. Ahead, she saw the stack, Captain Sterling's team moving in a standard CQB, close quarters battle formation. Point man, slack man, medic, rear guard. They looked aggressive. They looked powerful. They looked like targets. "Stop," Lena breathed, though she was too far away for them to hear. The corridor leading to the control room was narrow, lined with piping, a classic fatal funnel. If the door at the end was breached, anyone standing in the hallway had 0 cover. The point man kicked the door. Crash. "Federal agents! Get on the ground!" The shout was met with a sound that Lena knew better than her own heartbeat. It wasn't the loud, cinematic bang of a gunfight. It was a dry, high-pitched thwip, 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 suppressed automatic fire. The point man jerked backward as if yanked by an invisible cable. His body hit the grating with a wet thud, sliding back toward his team. Blood, black in the emergency red lighting, sprayed across the white bulkhead. "Contact front! Contact front!" Sterling screamed, his voice cracking. "Miller, lay down fire!" The Rangers unleashed a wall of noise, unsuppressed M4 carbines roaring in the confined space. The sound was deafening, a physical pressure that hammered against the eardrums, but they were firing blind into the smoke of the breach. From the gantries above the corridor, positions the Rangers hadn't cleared, muzzle flashes sparked like strobe lights. Thwip, thwip. Another Ranger went down, clutching his thigh. The team was trapped in an L-shaped ambush. The enemy held the high ground and the fatal funnel. Lena didn't think. The civilian analyst vanished. The Wraith stepped forward, She sprinted, not away from the gunfire, but toward it. She grabbed Sterling by the back of his plate carrier and hauled him behind a thick hydraulic pump assembly, just as bullets sparked off the steel where his head had been. "Get off me!" Sterling shouted, spinning around, his eyes wide with the tunnel vision of combat shock. "They're flanking you!" Lena roared over the din, pointing up at the gantry. "Pull back to the bulkhead door. You're in a kill box." "We have to secure the control room," Sterling argued, trying to push past her. "Standard procedure is violence of action." "Standard procedure works against insurgents, not operators." Lena grabbed his face mask, forcing him to look at her. "Look at their fire discipline, Captain. Single shots, double taps. They aren't spraying. They're slicing the pie from the high ground." She gestured to a shadow moving fluidly along the catwalk above. The figure moved with a distinct, aggressive efficiency, weapon tucked tight, leading with the elbow. "That's Spetsnaz movement doctrine," Lena hissed. "Alpha Group or Vimpel. These aren't terrorists. They're professionals." Sterling blinked. For a second, the information seemed to penetrate. He looked at his wounded men, then at the woman in the gray parka who was analyzing enemy infantry tactics in the middle of a firefight. Then, the ego engaged. The double bind snapped shut. To listen to her, an older civilian woman, was to admit he had lost control of his unit in the first 5 minutes. "You're delirious," Sterling snapped. He keyed his radio. "Miller, pop smoke! Fall back to the mess deck! Drag Corporal Hicks!" He turned to Lena, his face hardening into a mask of fragile authority. "And you. Get out of my AO." "I can help you," Lena said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "I know this rig. I know the ventilation shafts. I can flank them. You'll get yourself killed and my men killed trying to save you." Sterling spat. He grabbed a young private, a terrified kid named Gomez. "Gomez, get this woman to the mess hall. Lock her in. Do not let her out under any circumstances. That is a direct order." "But Captain!" "Go!" Gomez grabbed Lena's arm. "Ma'am, please, we have to go." Lena looked at Sterling. She saw the fear behind his eyes, masked by aggression. She calculated the odds of disarming Gomez, knocking Sterling out, and taking command. It would take 3 seconds. But the rest of the Rangers would shoot her. They were trained to follow the chain of command, not the logic of survival. "You're making a mistake," Lena said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement of fact. She let Gomez pull her away. As they retreated down the corridor, the smoke from the grenades filling the air with the acrid taste of sulfur, Lena looked back. She saw the enemy on the gantry stop firing. They didn't chase. They didn't scream war cries. They simply watched the Rangers retreat, holding their ground with terrifying discipline. Sterling thought he was regrouping. Lena knew the truth. They were being herded. The mess hall door slammed shut. The heavy deadbolt slid into place with a sound of finality. "I'm sorry, ma'am," Gomez said from the other side, his voice trembling. "It's for your own safety." Lena stood in the dark room, listening to the distant, muffled thud of explosions. She looked at her hands. They weren't shaking. They were steady. She walked to the stainless steel kitchen counter. She picked up a heavy, serrated steak knife. She tested the edge against her thumb. "Safety," she whispered into the dark. "There is no safety." The mess hall was a stainless steel cage. The vibration of the storm outside hummed through the floor plates, a constant, subsonic reminder of their isolation. Private Gomez stood by the locked bulkhead door, his M4 carbine slung across his chest. He looked terrified. His eyes darted between the door and the shadows. his fingers drumming a nervous rhythm on the receiver of his weapon. Lena sat at one of the bolted-down tables, her hands resting flat on the cold metal surface. She wasn't looking at Gomez. She was listening. Through the thick steel walls, she could hear the muffled thump-thump of suppressed gunfire from the decks above. The Rangers were being hunted. "You need to let me out, Private," Lena said. Her voice was low, devoid of the panic Gomez clearly felt. "I can't do that, ma'am," Gomez stammered, checking his radio for the third time in a minute. "Captain's orders. It's not safe out there." "It's not safe in here," Lena corrected him. "Your captain is walking into a fatal funnel. He's fighting Spetsnaz tactics with a hammer when he needs a scalpel. If I don't flank them, your friends are going to die." Gomez stiffened. "Stay back, ma'am, please." He raised his hand, a gesture of warning. Lena stood up. She moved slowly, telegraphing her movements to avoid triggering his trigger finger. She needed to close the distance. 10 feet. "Do you know why they jam the comms, Gomez?" she asked, taking a step. "It's not just to stop us from calling for help. It's to isolate the unit, to make you feel alone, to make you hesitate." "Stop!" Gomez leveled his rifle. His safety was off. He was shaking. Lena didn't stop. She accelerated. In the 0.5 seconds it took for Gomez's brain to process the threat, Lena had closed the gap. She didn't strike him. She flowed around the barrel of the rifle. Her left hand clamped onto the heat shield of the M4, pushing the muzzle toward the ceiling. Her right hand snaked behind his neck. It wasn't a brawl. It was simple physics. She stepped inside his guard, using her hip as a fulcrum. With a sharp twist of her hips and a pull on his collar, she unbalanced him. Gomez stumbled forward. Lena transitioned instantly into a standing rear naked choke. "Sleep," she whispered. Gomez thrashed for 2 seconds, his hands clawing at her forearm. Then his legs went limp. Lena lowered him gently to the deck, careful not to let his gear clatter against the metal. She checked his pulse, strong and steady. He would be out for 10 minutes. She stripped his radio and his sidearm, a Sig Sauer M17. She checked the chamber. Loaded. "Sorry, kid," she murmured, securing the door behind her. Lena moved into the corridor. The rig was a labyrinth of shadows and red emergency lights. She knew every conduit, every valve, every blind spot on the Valkyrie. She didn't head for the lifeboats. She headed for the secondary security station on the maintenance deck, a small, cramped room used for monitoring drill head pressure, but which also had a hardline feed to the rig's CCTV cameras. She slipped inside the dark room, locking the door. She booted up the terminal. The screens flickered to life, washing the room in a pale, ghostly blue light. Static fuzz distorted the images, but what she saw made her blood run cold. On camera 4, the main drilling platform, the Rangers were pinned down behind heavy machinery. They were taking fire from 3 sides. On camera 7, the helipad, a team of acolytes was unloading a large, cylindrical device from a crate. It wasn't an explosive. It was a dispersion unit. "Bioweapon," Lena breathed. The canister bore the markings of a VX gas variant, but modified for high-altitude dispersal. If they launched that missile into the jet stream of the storm, the fallout wouldn't just kill everyone on the rig. It would drift toward the coast of Scotland. Thousands would die. This wasn't a hijacking. It was a mass casualty event. Lena switched to camera 2, the control room. The enemy had breached it. 3 bodies in Ranger uniforms lay on the floor. In the center of the room, a man stood over the main console, issuing orders to his subordinates. He wasn't wearing a mask. He turned toward the security monitor, as if he sensed he was being watched. The image was grainy, pixelated by the storm's interference, but Lena would recognize that face in hell. The scar running from his left ear to his jaw, the pale, dead eyes. "Kozlov," she whispered. The memories hit her like a physical blow. Syria, the dusty marketplace, the intelligence failure, the child she couldn't save. Kozlov was the broker who had sold the chemical weapons to the regime. He was the reason she had retired. The reason she couldn't sleep without medication. He was supposed to be dead. She had seen the drone strike that leveled his compound. "He survived," Lena said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and terror. This wasn't random. The acolytes weren't just terrorists. They were mercenaries working for a ghost. And if Kozlov was here, he wouldn't leave until everyone on this rig was erased. Lena looked at the screen where Sterling and his surviving men were being herded toward a kill zone. They had no idea who they were fighting. They were playing checkers against a grandmaster of asymmetric warfare. The silent professional in her wanted to radio for extraction, to find a way off this metal coffin. But the matriarch saw the young rangers dying, and the monster inside her, the part she had buried in Aleppo, woke up. She reached into her parka and pulled out a roll of heavy-duty duct tape and a flare gun she had swiped from the emergency locker. "You want a war, Kozlov?" she whispered to the screen. "I'll give you a war." She keyed the stolen radio, breaking radio silence on the Ranger frequency. "Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the static and the gunfire. "Check your 6. You're being flanked by a 2-man element on the upper gantry. Break right now." "Who is this?" Sterling's voice came back, panicked and breathless. "The person who is going to save your life," Lena replied. "Do exactly what I say, or you all die in the next 30 seconds. She didn't wait for an answer. She moved. The civilian engineer was gone. The Wraith had returned. The static in Lena's earpiece hissed like a nest of vipers, a chaotic white noise that matched the storm battering the hull of the Valkyrie. In the cramped security station, the blue glow of the CRT monitors washed over her face, turning her scars into jagged valleys of shadow. She pressed the headset tighter against her ear, her eyes locked on camera 4. On the screen, Captain Sterling and his team were pinned down behind a stack of drilling pipes. Above them, 2 shadows detached themselves from the darkness of the derrick, repelling silently toward the Ranger's exposed flank. "Sterling," Lena said again, her voice stripping away all civilian inflection. 2 hostiles dropping on your 3 o'clock. Elevation 20 feet. If you don't suppress that catwalk, you lose your medic." There was a pause, a hesitation measured in heartbeats that cost blood. "Who is this?" Sterling's voice cracked through the radio, distorted by adrenaline and wind. "Gomez? Is that you?" "Suppress the catwalk," Lena barked, the command override kicking in. It wasn't the voice of an engineer. It was the voice of a Master Chief who had run kill teams on 3 continents. On the monitor, Sterling reacted instinctively to the tone of absolute authority. He swung his carbine up and fired a burst toward the derrick. Sparks showered down as bullets struck the grating. The 2 repelling figures jerked, their lines severed or their bodies hit. It was impossible to tell in the grain, and they plummeted into the churning sea below. "Contact rear," someone screamed on the Ranger net. "They're flanking us." "I told you," Lena whispered. "Now move. Get to the moon pool. It's the only defensible position on that deck." She watched them scramble. They were alive because of her, but the victory felt like ash in her mouth. Her gaze drifted to the other monitor. to the frozen image of the man in the control room. Kozlov. The name triggered a physical recoil in her brain. The cold metal of the oil rig dissolved. The smell of ozone and salt vanished, replaced by the suffocating scent of pulverized concrete and rotting garbage. Aleppo, 2016. The heat was oppressive, a physical weight pressing down on her sniper hide. She was looking through the scope of the XM210, the reticle hovering over a marketplace stall. The target was supposed to be a chemical weapons broker. Intelligence had been high confidence. Windage 0, her spotter had whispered. Send it. Lena remembered the squeeze, the recoil, the perfect flight of the .300 Winchester Magnum round. But just as the bullet bridged the distance, the broker moved, and behind him, a door opened. A child stepped out, a girl in a yellow dress. The pink mist hadn't belonged to the target. Lena slammed her hands onto the console, the sound echoing in the small room. The flashback receded, but the ringing in her ears remained. A high-pitched whine of tinnitus that she had lived with for 7 years. It was the sound of her moral injury, a constant frequency of guilt that no therapy could silence. She looked at the screen. Kozlov hadn't just survived the subsequent drone strike that leveled the city block. He had thrived. He was here, on her rig, about to unleash something far worse than a single shell, and she was the only one who knew his playbook. The ringing grew louder. She felt the dissociation creeping in, the sensation that she was floating above her own body, watching a stranger manage the console. Not now, she commanded herself. You don't get to break down. Not while there are kids down there. By kids, she meant the Rangers. They looked so young on the monitors, just like the girl in the yellow dress. She keyed the mic again. Sterling, listen to me. The enemy commander is using a Spetsnaz hammer and anvil tactic. He's pushing you toward the drill floor because he has a heavy machine gun set up in the derrick. Do not go up, go down. Use the maintenance hatch at Sector 4. Identify yourself, Sterling shouted. How do you know our position? Are you with them? I'm the engineer you told to make coffee, Lena said, her voice flat. And I'm looking at the thermal feed. You are walking into a kill zone. Command, we have a rogue transmission, Sterling yelled to his RTO. Possible enemy PSYOPs. They've compromised our comms. I am not enemy PSYOPs, you idiot, Lena hissed. I'm trying to save your life. Cut the channel, Sterling ordered. Switch to encrypted frequency Bravo 6. Go dark. No, wait. The radio went dead. Static replaced the frantic voices of the Rangers. Lena stared at the handset in her hand. He had cut her off. He believed the lie of his own training, that a civilian woman couldn't possibly offer tactical salvation, so the voice must be a deception. It was the ultimate confirmation bias. She looked at the monitor. The Rangers were regrouping, moving away from the maintenance hatch she had indicated. They were heading up the stairs toward the drill floor, toward the trap. You're going to die, she whispered. The silent professional inside her calculated the odds. She was safe here. She could barricade the door, wait for the storm to pass, and hope the extraction team arrived before the bioweapon launched. That was the rational choice. That was the survivor's choice. But the matriarch saw the Rangers moving toward the slaughter. Lena stood up. She grabbed the flare gun and the duct tape. She checked the Sig Sauer she had taken from Gomez. She didn't want to fight. She hated the weight of the gun. It felt heavy with the ghosts of everyone she had killed. But she couldn't watch another child die because of bad intelligence and arrogant command. She opened the door to the corridor. The wind howled, sounding like the screams of the dying in Aleppo. "Fine," Lena said to the empty rig. "If you won't listen to the engineer, you'll have to listen to the Wraith." She stepped out into the storm. The storm had evolved from a weather event into a physical assault. On the external gantries of the Valkyrie, the wind didn't just blow. It shoved, screaming at 70 miles per hour, stripping the heat from any exposed skin in seconds. Lena moved along the lower maintenance catwalk, her body pressed low against the rusted grating. She didn't sprint. Sprinting on wet steel in a gale was a good way to slip and fall 200 feet into the North Sea. She moved with a crab-like, deliberate cadence, placing each boot flat, testing the grip before shifting her weight. Above her, on the main drill deck, she could hear the Rangers. They were shouting over the wind, their voices thin and ragged. "Move up! Secure the derrick!" Sterling's voice. Lena cursed under her breath. He was following the standard playbook, seize the high ground. But on an oil rig, the high ground was a cage if you didn't control the angles. The derrick was a lattice of steel beams, offering zero ballistic cover, only concealment. She reached a ladder well and looked up through the mesh. She had a clear view of the Rangers' formation. They were bunched up, pushing toward the base of the drill tower. They looked aggressive. They looked like predators. Then the floodlights snapped on. 4 halogen arrays, mounted high on the derrick, blinded the team. The light was dazzling, turning the rain into a wall of white static. Thump, 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 thump. A heavy machine gun, a PKM, judging by the deep chugging report, opened up from the darkness above the lights. It wasn't suppressed. The muzzle flash was a strobe light of death. The laid Ranger, the point man who had kicked the door earlier, disintegrated. The 7.62mm rounds didn't just hit him. They tore through his ceramic plates and turned his torso into red mist. He was dead before he hit the deck. "Ambush! Contact high! Contact high!" The Rangers scattered, diving behind the mud pumps and pipe stacks. But the cover was directional. They were protected from the front, but they had forgotten the flank. From the container stacks to the east, a second firing position opened up. Crossfire. The air was filled with the terrifying snap of supersonic rounds passing inches from flesh. Sparks showered down as bullets chewed through the steel machinery. The Rangers were trapped in a classic L-shaped ambush, pinned against the railing with nowhere to go but down into the freezing ocean. "Suppressing fire!" Sterling screamed. He was huddled behind a winch, his face pale, blood from a graze on his cheek mixing with the rain. "Sergeant, get that sniper up here. Neutralize that gun!" Lena watched as the young corporal she had helped earlier, the one with the heavy XM2010 sniper rifle, tried to crawl forward. He was terrified. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely deploy the bipod. He popped up, trying to find a target through the blinding lights. "Don't do it, kid," Lena thought, gripping the cold rung of the ladder. "Displace. Move left." The corporal didn't displace. He settled his cheek against the stock. A single shot rang out from the derrick. Not the machine gun. A designated marksman. The corporal's head snapped back violently. His helmet flew off, spinning across the wet deck. He slumped forward over his rifle, his body going limp in that boneless final way that Lena had seen 1,000 times. The Rangers stopped firing. The shock of seeing their Overwatch element eliminated so casually broke their momentum. They were just kids. Well-trained, fit, eager kids, but they had never fought people who hunted them back with this level of precision. Sterling was yelling into his radio, but nobody was answering. The jammer was still active. He looked around, his eyes wide, realizing for the first time that his rank and his training meant nothing here. He was going to die. They were all going to die. Lena felt the matriarch instinct rise in her chest, a hot, painful pressure that overrode the fear. These weren't soldiers to her anymore. They were the girl in the yellow dress in Syria. They were innocents led to the slaughter by incompetence. She climbed. She vaulted over the railing onto the main deck, landing in a crouch behind a stack of drilling pipes. She was 10 meters from Sterling, 15 meters from the dead corporal and the rifle. The machine gun fire paused. The enemy was reloading, or perhaps they were just enjoying the pause, letting the terror set in. The silence was worse than the noise. It was the sound of a predator playing with its food. Lena looked at the XM200 lying on the wet grating. It was a beautiful weapon. A .300 Winchester Magnum chassis, capable of reaching out past a mile. It was the tool of her trade, the extension of her soul that she had sworn never to touch again. If I pick it up, I'm not Lena the engineer anymore, she told herself. I'm the Wraith. And the Wraith doesn't retire. She looked at Sterling. He was checking his magazine, his hands trembling. He looked at her, his eyes registering shock at seeing the civilian woman in the middle of a firefight. "Get back," he hissed. "You'll get killed." Lena ignored him. She looked at the dead boy. She looked at the rifle. She took a breath. The cold, salt air filled her lungs, sharpening her focus. The ringing in her ears stopped. The dissociation vanished. The world narrowed down to vectors, windage, and elevation. She sprinted. She moved low and fast, a gray blur against the gray steel. She slid on her knees next to the corporal's body. She didn't look at his face. She couldn't. Instead, she grabbed the rifle by the pistol grip and the forend. She rolled onto her back, checking the action. The bolt was cycled. A round was chambered. The optics were intact. "Hey!" Sterling shouted, starting to rise. "Put that down! That's government property!" Lena rolled into a prone position, using the dead corporal's legs as a sandbag to stabilize the barrel. It was a grim improvisation, but war had no room for dignity. She pressed her eye to the scope. The reticle glowed red. "Shut up, Captain," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind. She was back. The scope of the XM2010 was a Schmidt & Bender 525 high-quality glass. Through it, the chaotic blur of the storm resolved into a clear, terrifying picture. Lena scanned the derrick. The blinding floodlights washed out the thermal sensor, rendering it useless. She switched to the standard optical view. The rain slashed across the lens, distorting the image, but her brain automatically filtered out the noise. She wasn't looking for a man. She was looking for the anomaly, the straight line in a world of curves, the shadow that didn't move with the wind. There, 80 feet up, third platform. Between the cross bracing, a sliver of black fabric flapping, a barrel protruding just inches past the steel girder. "Wind," she muttered. The wind on the deck was 40 knots from the east, but up on the tower it would be faster. 50 knots. Maybe 60. And it was turbulent, swirling around the lattice structure. "Standard deviation is too high. I can't get a lock." Sergeant Miller, Sterling's second-in-command, was screaming somewhere to her left, trying to bring his own rifle to bear. "Captain, the windage is pushing 40 knots. It's an impossible shot." Sterling grabbed Miller's shoulder. "Take the shot, Sergeant. If that gun opens up again, we're finished." "I can't. I'll miss." Lena stood up. She didn't stay in the prone position. The angle was too steep. The railing obscured her line of sight to the upper gantry. She needed elevation. She stepped out from behind the cover of the pipes, fully exposed to the enemy fire. "Move," she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the panic like a razor. Sterling spun around, eyes wild. He saw the civilian woman standing there, holding the sniper rifle with a casual familiarity that terrified him. "Get back inside, analyst," Sterling yelled, his fear transmuting into anger. "Go make coffee or something. This is men's work." Lena didn't blink. She didn't look at him. She walked past him, her movement fluid as water. She rested the heavy barrel of the XM2010 on the yellow handrail of the platform. It wasn't a stable bench rest. The railing was vibrating from the rig's engines. It didn't matter. Her body absorbed the vibration. She widened her stance, locking her knees, turning her skeletal structure into a tripod. "Wind is 42 knots. Full value from the east," she whispered, her cheek welding to the stock. "Updraft from the moon pool adds 2 MOA vertical. Coriolis is negligible. Spin drift is left." Sterling stared at her. "What are you Lena exhaled. She didn't hold her breath. She fired at the bottom of the respiratory pause, the moment where the body is most still. Crack. The recoil punched into her shoulder, a familiar bruising kiss. The sound of the 300 Win Mag was distinct, a sharp, thunderous clap that dwarfed the rattle of the carbines. Lena didn't flinch. She kept her eye on the scope, riding the recoil to watch the trace. The bullet cut through the rain, a microscopic distortion in the air. It fought the wind, drifting right, pushed by the gale, but arching true. Up on the derrick, the shadow behind the machine gun jerked. A spray of pink mist erupted against the white floodlight behind him, painting the glass in a gruesome abstract art. The machine gunner slumped forward, tumbling over the railing. He fell 80 feet, crashing onto the deck with a wet, heavy crunch. The PKM clattered down beside him. Silence. For 3 seconds, the only sound was the howling wind. The enemy snipers on the flank ceased fire, stunned by the sudden elimination of their heavy support. Lena cycled the bolt. Clack, clack. The empty brass casing spun through the air and chimed against the steel deck. She turned to Sterling. The captain's mouth was slightly open. The rain dripped from the brim of his helmet. He looked from the dead gunner to the woman in the gray parka. "That was 800 meters, Miller whispered, staring at his rangefinder. "Standing. In a hurricane." Sterling looked at Lena. He really looked at her this time. He saw the way she held the weapon, finger indexed along the trigger guard, muzzle discipline absolute. He saw the scar running down her neck, visible now that her hood had blown back. He saw the eyes that were emptier than the ocean. "Who are you?" Sterling asked. The arrogance was gone. In its place was a dawning realization that he was standing next to something dangerous. Lena didn't answer. She grabbed the radio from Miller's vest, ripping it free from the Velcro. "This is Wraith." She spoke into the mic, her voice cold and flat. "Heavy gun is down. Flanking element, shift fire to Sector 3. Suppress the east catwalk." She looked at Sterling. "I tried to tell you, Captain, but you were too busy telling me to make coffee. Now are you going to give orders? Or do I have to save the rest of your men too?" Sterling swallowed hard. The power dynamic on the rig had shifted instantly. The rank on his chest said he was in charge. The rifle in her hands said otherwise. "Miller," Sterling croaked. "Shift fire. Sector 3. Lena nodded once. She turned back to the storm, scanning for the next target. The civilian was dead. The silent professional had taken the field, and she had 108 kills to her name. This would be 109. The immediate threat was neutralized, but the tactical situation remained critical. The Rangers, galvanized by the sudden shift in momentum, poured suppressive fire into the eastern catwalks, forcing the remaining acolyte shooters to keep their heads down. Lena didn't join the shooting. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and moved back to the relative cover of the pipe stack. The adrenaline dump was hitting her now, a cold tremor in her hands that she hid by gripping her vest. Sterling crawled over to her. He was still trying to process what had just happened. "You're not an engineer," he said. It wasn't a question. "I am an engineer," Lena corrected him, checking the magazine of the sniper rifle. 3 rounds left. She needed ammo. "I fix structures. Right now, your command structure is broken, so I'm fixing that too." "You're Navy," Sterling said, noting the specific jargon she had used on the radio. "SEAL." "Retired," Lena said. She looked him in the eye. "Master Chief Lena Kovich, Development Group." Sterling flinched. "DEVGRU, SEAL Team 6, the elite of the elite. The Tier 1 operators who handled the missions that didn't exist." He felt a flush of shame burn his neck. He had told a Master Chief from DEVGRU to make coffee. "Master Chief?" Sterling said, his voice stiff. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Lena snapped. "You saw a woman in a parka and you assumed I was a liability. That assumption cost Corporal Hicks his life." She pointed to the dead sniper. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Sterling looked at his fallen man. The guilt hit him then, a crushing weight. "I followed ROI," Sterling defended himself weakly. "I followed protocol." "You followed a map that doesn't match the terrain," Lena said. "Kozlov isn't playing by your rules. He's baiting you. He wants you to push up so he can detonate the rig supports and drop this whole platform into the sea." "Kozlov?" Sterling asked. "The broker?" "He's here, in the control room, and he has a bioweapon." Lena pulled a folded schematic from her pocket. The rig's blueprints. She spread it on the wet deck, weighing it down with a heavy wrench. "We can't take the control room from the main deck," she explained, tracing a line with her finger. "The fatal funnel is rigged with IEDs. I saw them on the cameras before I came out. If you breach that door, you vaporize the hostages." "So what do we do?" Sterling asked. He had ceded command. He didn't say it formally, but his posture screamed it. He was looking to her for the solution. "We go vertical," Lena said. "We go down into the moon pool, climb the derrick from the inside maintenance ladder, and drop onto the roof of the control room. We breach from the ceiling." "That ladder is rusted out," Sterling argued. "And it's a 100-foot climb over open water. In this wind?" "It's the only way they won't be watching," Lena said. "They're expecting soldiers. They're not expecting climbers." She looked at the surviving Rangers. There were only 4 of them left combat effective. They were looking at her, too. They had heard the shot. They knew who she was now. The doubt in their eyes had been replaced by awe and something else, hope. "I need your best climber," Lena said. "And I need all the C4 you have." "That would be Gomez," Miller said, pointing to the young private Lena had choked out earlier. He was conscious now, rubbing his neck, looking at Lena with a mixture of terror and respect. "Gomez," Lena nodded. "You awake, Private?" "Yes, ma'am, Chief," Gomez stammered. "Good. Grab the charges. We're going for a climb." Lena stood up. She handed the sniper rifle to Miller. "Cover us. If anything moves on that upper deck that isn't me, kill it." Aye, Chief, Miller said, taking the weapon. Sterling stood up. He hesitated, then unclipped his own sidearm, a customized 1911, and held it out to her. You might need this. It's got better stopping power than that SIG. Lena looked at the gun. Then she looked at Sterling. It was an offering, an apology. She took it. Maintain the perimeter, Captain. Don't let them flank us again. We'll hold, Sterling said. Give them hell, Chief. I intend to. Lena turned and headed for the moon pool hatch. As she descended into the darkness of the rig's underbelly, she felt the familiar weight of command settling onto her shoulders. It was a heavy cloak, woven from the lives of the men she led. She hated it. But she wore it better than anyone else. The identity reveal was complete. Now came the hard part, the hunt. The moon pool was a cavernous, echoing chamber where the ocean surged up through the center of the rig. It smelled of brine, crude oil, and freezing iron. The roar of the waves below was deafening, a churning black abyss that threatened to swallow the sound of their breathing. Lena knelt by the main pressure manifold of the steam injection system. Her hands moved with the precise mechanical efficiency of a surgeon. She wasn't building a bomb. She was creating a pressure cooker. Gomez, she said. Her voice pitched low to cut under the ambient noise. How fast can you climb the internal maintenance ladder? In this wind, with 40 pounds of gear? Gomez swallowed hard, looking up into the lattice of dark steel that stretched 100 feet above them. 10 minutes, maybe 12. You have 8, Lena said. She stripped a length of copper wire from a junction box and wrapped it around the valve wheel of the steam release. I'm going to overpressurize the venting system on the B-deck catwalk. It's going to sound like the rig is tearing itself apart. The acolytes will send a reaction force to investigate. Sterling watched her. He held the 1911 she had returned to him, but he looked lost. And when they investigate? Then I open the valve, Lena said. She didn't look up. Superheated steam at 600 psi isn't a deterrent, Captain. It's a meat grinder. She finished the rigging. It was a crude dead man switch triggered by a tripwire across the catwalk entrance. Move, Lena ordered. Get to the ladder. Don't stop for anything. They moved into the shadows of the derrick's understructure. Gomez took the lead. Clipping his carabiner to the rusted safety rail, Lena followed, with Sterling bringing up the rear. They were 30 feet up when the trap sprang. Below them, a door banged open. The beams of tactical flashlights cut through the gloom of the moon pool. 3 men, moving fast, professional. One of them tripped the wire. Hiss, crack. The sound was not an explosion, it was a shriek. A jet of invisible, superheated steam blasted across the walkway with the force of a jet engine. The screams that followed were human, but they didn't sound like it. They were wet, guttural sounds of shock and agony as skin blistered and peeled instantly. The flashlight beams spun wildly as the men thrashed, blinded and boiling in their own clothes. Above them, on the ladder, Sterling froze. He stared down at the carnage. He had seen combat. He had seen death, but he had never seen this. This wasn't soldiering. This was extermination. Don't look, Lena hissed, grabbing his ankle. Climb. Sterling looked down at her. Her face was illuminated by the red emergency lights. There was no pity in her eyes, no hesitation, just a cold, flat calculation of assets and liabilities. You enjoyed that, Sterling whispered, his voice trembling. I needed them loud, Lena replied, pushing him upward. The screams cover the sound of our boots. Climb. The monster had awakened. Lena felt the familiar, toxic rush of adrenaline, the combat high that she had spent years trying to drown in whiskey and paperwork. She hated herself for it. She hated that she was good at this, that she knew exactly how much pressure it took to strip flesh from bone. But as they ascended into the howling wind of the upper derrick, leaving the dying men below, she knew one thing for certain. Kozlov had brought war to her home. She was just rearranging the furniture. The wind at the top of the derrick was a physical assault. It screamed through the steel lattice, threatening to tear them from the ladder with every gust. They were 150 feet above the sea, suspended in a chaotic void of rain and darkness. Lena reached the service platform for the crown block. She pulled herself over the grating, her muscles burning. She signaled for Gomez and Sterling to stay low. Directly below them was the roof of the control room. "Gomez!" Lena shouted over the gale. "The charges! Shape charges on the hinges of the roof hatch. We blow it and drop in." Gomez nodded, his hands shaking as he primed the C4. He was a ranger, trained for direct action, but this, hanging off a rig in a hurricane while his XO orchestrated a vertical breach, was outside the manual. "Ready," Gomez signaled. "On my mark," Lena said. She checked the load in her weapon. 3, 2, 1, execute. Boom. The explosion was muted by the storm, a dull thump that vibrated through their boots. The heavy steel hatch blew inward. "Go! Go! Go!" They dropped. Lena hit the floor of the control room, rolling to absorb the impact. She came up in a weaver stance, scanning the room. "Federal agents, drop it!" Sterling screamed, sweeping left. The room was bathed in the blue light of the monitors. The bodies of the Rangers from the first assault were still there, pushed into a corner, but the room was empty of hostiles. "Clear left. Clear right." "Where are they?" Gomez asked, spinning around. The cameras showed Kozlov here. Lena holstered her weapon and sprinted to the main console. The missile launch interface was active. A digital countdown timer dominated the center screen. T-4. "They aren't here because they don't need to be," Lena said, her stomach dropping. "The sequence is locked. The missile is fueled. They've moved to the extraction point." "Abort it," Sterling ordered, rushing to the keyboard. "Hack it. You're the engineer." "It's hard-coded," Lena typed furiously, bypassing the admin protocols. "Kozlov has an encrypted deadman switch. If I force a shutdown, it triggers the warhead right here in the tube." "We have to physically disable the missile," Sterling said. "Where is it?" "The silo is on the subdeck," Lena pointed to the schematic. "But Captain—" She stopped. She heard a sound. Not a mechanical hum, a mechanical click. The distinct sound of a heavy magnetic lock engaging on the door behind them. The door they hadn't breached. "We're locked in," Lena whispered. The monitors flickered. The image of the countdown timer was replaced by a video feed. Kozlov's face filled the screen. He was smiling. He was sitting in the comms room of the rig's lifeboat station. "Hello, Wraith," Kozlov said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and terrifying. "I was wondering when you would join the party. You look older." "Kozlov," Lena said, stepping toward the screen. "Stop the launch." "And ruin the climax?" Kozlov laughed. "You always lacked a sense of theater, Lena. That's why you failed in Aleppo. You focused on the target and missed the context." "We have you surrounded," Sterling bluffed, stepping into the frame. "Surrender now." Kozlov looked at Sterling with amused pity. "Captain, you aren't the hunter. You're the bait." A hissing sound filled the room. Not steam this time. Gas. Lena looked at the vents. White, odorless gas was pumping into the control room. Halothane. Lena identified it instantly. Knockout gas. Masks! Sterling shouted, fumbling for his pouch. It's too late, Lena said, feeling her limbs go heavy. The room began to spin. He knew we'd come here. He wanted us here. She slumped against the console. Her vision tunneled. The last thing she saw was Kozlov's scarred face on the screen, watching her fall. Sleep now, Wraith, the voice echoed. We have much to discuss. Consciousness returned as a sharp, stinging slap. Lena's head snapped back. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. She opened her eyes. She was zip-tied to a heavy steel chair. The room was small, smelling of diesel and old sweat. The auxiliary workshop near the helipad. Sterling and Gomez were slumped against the far wall, unconscious but alive. Kozlov stood in front of her. He held a combat knife, idly cleaning his fingernails with the tip. He wore a pristine tactical turtleneck that looked absurdly clean against the grime of the rig. Welcome back, he said softly. Go to hell, Lena rasped. We are already there, Lena. This is the North Sea. He pulled a chair over and sat facing her, knee to knee. It was an intimate, terrifying proximity. I want the bypass codes for the rig's stabilization thrusters, Kozlov said. The storm is pushing us off station. I need to stabilize the platform to launch the missile. I'm a structural engineer, Lena lied, her voice steady despite the throbbing in her skull. I don't have access to the navigation systems. Kozlov sighed. He reached out and touched the scar on her neck, the one she got from shrapnel in Kandahar. Don't insult me, he whispered. I know who you are. Master Chief Lena Kovich, DEVGRU, the woman who took a 2,400-meter shot in the Kush Mountains to save a CIA asset. The woman who inadvertently directed a Hellfire missile into a market stall in Aleppo because she trusted bad intel. Lena flinched. The mention of Aleppo was a physical blow. That wasn't me, she whispered. It was you, Kozlov pressed. I saw the report. You spotted the target. You gave the green light. You killed the girl in the yellow dress, Lena. Not me. I just sold the gas. You deployed the fire. This was the interrogation. He wasn't using pliers or waterboarding. He was using moral injury. He was tearing open the wound she had spent 7 years stitching shut. Stop it, Lena said, closing her eyes. Give me the codes, Kozlov said, leaning in. Or I will wake up your captain, and I will peel him like an orange while you watch, and you will add his death to your ledger. Lena looked at Sterling. He was stirring. If Kozlov touched him, she needed to think. She needed a weapon. She had nothing. Her hands were bound. Her feet were tied to the chair legs. She looked at Kozlov. He was arrogant. He thought he had broken her. He thought she was just a retired, traumatized woman. He forgot about SEER school. Survival, evasion, resistance, escape. Lena began to blink, a rapid, rhythmic fluttering of her eyelids. Dot, 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 dash, dash, dash. Sterling groaned, lifting his head. His eyes met hers. He was groggy, concussed, but he was a ranger. He saw the pattern. SOS, no, that wasn't it. She changed the rhythm. K-I-C-K. Sterling frowned, confused. Then he looked at Kozlov's position. Kozlov was leaning forward, his back to Sterling, focused entirely on breaking Lena. The codes, Lena. Kozlov raised the knife. Last chance. The code, Lena said, her voice dropping to a whisper, forcing him to lean closer, is... She tensed every muscle in her core. Go to hell. She threw her head forward, smashing her forehead into Kozlov's nose. It was a Glasgow kiss, delivered with the force of a piston. Cartilage crunched. Kozlov reeled back, blinded by tears and blood, screaming. "Now!" Lena shouted. Sterling didn't hesitate. He didn't have a weapon, but he had boots. He lunged forward, driving his heel into the back of Kozlov's knee, shattering the joint. Kozlov went down. "The knife!" Lena screamed. "Get the knife!" This wasn't a fight. It was a scramble for survival in a locked room with a monster, and Lena Kovic was done being the victim. The knife skittered across the metal deck, spinning away from Kozlov's grasping hand. "Gomez, wake up!" Sterling shouted, diving for the weapon. Kozlov, despite his shattered knee, was fast. He rolled, sweeping Sterling's legs. The captain hit the deck hard. Kozlov was on him instantly, his thumbs digging into Sterling's windpipe. The Russian mercenary's face was a mask of blood and rage. Lena strained against her bonds. The plastic zip ties dug into her wrists, cutting skin. She needed leverage. "The chair!" She gritted her teeth. She threw her weight backward, tipping the heavy steel chair. She slammed into the floor, the impact knocking the wind out of her. But now she was horizontal. She curled her legs up, bringing her bound ankles toward her hands. She couldn't cut the ties, but she had something else. In the heel of her right boot, concealed in the tread, was a friction saw, a thin, diamond-coated wire. Standard issue for operators operating in non-permissive environments. She had never taken it out. She contorted her body, biting the tab on her heel to pull the wire free. She looped it through the zip ties between her wrists. Saw, saw, saw. Kozlov was strangling Sterling. The captain's face was turning purple. He clawed uselessly at the mercenary's arms. Snap! The zip ties broke. Lena rolled, grabbing the chair leg. She smashed it against the floor to break the wood, freeing her legs. No, the chair was steel. She couldn't break it. She was still tied to it by her ankles. Improvise. She dragged herself and the chair across the floor. It scraped loudly, a screech of metal on metal. Kozlov looked up. Lena didn't stand. She couldn't. She launched herself from the floor, using her core strength to swing the heavy steel chair attached to her legs like a wrecking ball. The chair legs connected with Kozlov's temple. Clang. Kozlov collapsed off Sterling, his eyes rolling back in his head. He hit the deck and didn't move. Sterling gasped, sucking in air, coughing violently. He crawled away from the body, retching. "Cut me loose," Lena panted, lying tangled in the chair. Sterling grabbed the knife from the floor. He slashed the ties on her ankles. Lena stood up, rubbing her bleeding wrists. She looked down at Kozlov. He was breathing shallowly. "Kill him," Sterling rasped, wiping blood from his mouth. "Do it." Lena picked up the knife. She looked at Kozlov's throat. It would be so easy. It would be justice for Aleppo, for the girl in the yellow dress. She lowered the knife. "No," she said. "We need him. He knows the abort code for the missile." "He won't talk," Sterling argued. "You saw him. He's a fanatic." "He's not a fanatic," Lena said, searching Kozlov's pockets until she found a hardened USB drive. "He's a broker. Fanatics die for the cause. Brokers die for profit. He has an exit strategy." She moved to the door control. "Gomez, get up. We're moving." "Where?" Gomez groaned, clutching his head. "The missile silo," Lena said. "We have 2 minutes to stop the launch. If we can't abort it with the codes, we have to kill the missile." "How?" Sterling asked. Lena looked at the schematic on the wall. She pointed to the structural supports of the platform leg, directly adjacent to the missile tube. The rig is listing, she said. If we blow the main hydraulic accumulator on the east leg, the platform will tilt. It won't be stable enough to launch. The missile's gyroscope will trigger an automatic failsafe and lock the ignition. If you blow the leg, Sterling said, his eyes widening, the whole rig might capsize. We'll be in the water. Better wet than dead, Lena said. Or better us than 1 million people in Scotland. She opened the door. The storm roared outside, louder than before. Let's go wreck $1 billion oil rig, she said. The silent professional was gone. The saboteur had arrived. The bowels of the Valkyrie screamed. It wasn't a figure of speech. The structural steel was literally shrieking as the storm battered the legs of the platform, twisting millions of tons of iron against the force of the North Sea. Lena slid down the greasy ladder into the hydraulic control room, her boots hitting the grating with a heavy clang. Sterling and Gomez followed, looking like ghosts covered in soot and dried blood. "Gomez," Lena barked, moving to the main manifold. "How much C4 is left?" Gomez checked his pouch, his face pale. "None, Chief. We used the last blocks on the roof hatch. I have maybe a flashbang and 2 frags. That's it." "Frags won't dent these accumulators," Sterling said, wiping sweat from his eyes. "They're reinforced steel. We can't blow the leg." "We don't need explosives," Lena said. She pulled the schematic from her pocket, slamming it onto the vibration-rattled console. "We have physics." She pointed to the massive cylindrical tanks lining the walls. "These are hydraulic accumulators. They store potential energy to stabilize the rig against wave motion. They're pressurized to 3,000 psi. She traced a line to a smaller, red-painted pipe. "This is the natural gas injection line from the wellhead. If we bypass the regulator and feed raw well pressure directly into the hydraulic return line, we overpressure the east leg's piston." Sterling stared at the pipes. "You're going to blow the seal." "I'm going to blow the whole piston housing," Lena corrected. "The east leg will lose support. The rig will list 20 degrees to starboard instantly. The missile's guidance computer has a tilt sensor lock. If the platform isn't level within 2 degrees, the launch aborts to prevent a catastrophic detonation in the tube." "And if it lists too far?" Gomez asked quietly. "Then the rig capsizes," Lena said, "and we go for a swim." A klaxon began to blare from the overhead speakers, a rhythmic, grinding electronic pulse. "Warning, launch sequence initiated, T-minus 90 seconds. "Work!" Lena shouted. She threw a heavy wrench to Gomez. "Disconnect the safety relief valve on bank 4. Captain, find the manual override wheel for the gas intake." They worked with the desperate, frantic energy of drowning men. Sparks flew as Gomez hammered at the seized bolts. Sterling wrestled with the rusted intake wheel, his muscles straining against the corrosion of the sea. "Valve is open!" Sterling yelled. "Bypass connected!" Gomez screamed over the hissing of escaping gas. Lena ran to the central control panel. She punched in the command to cycle the pumps. The pressure gauges on the wall spiked. The needles buried themselves in the red. The pipes began to shake, a deep, resonant thrumming that vibrated in the marrow of their bones. 6,000 psi, 7,000 psi. "It's not blowing," Sterling yelled. "The electronic solenoid on the main release is jammed. It won't dump the pressure." Lena looked at the panel. The fault light was blinking. The solenoid had fused, likely from the power surges caused by their earlier sabotage. She looked through the blast-proof glass into the accumulator chamber. There was a manual dump wheel on the main tank. It was a fail-safe, designed to be operated by a technician during maintenance. But to operate it, You had to be in the room, next to the tank that was about to explode with the force of a bomb. The solenoid is dead, Lena said, her voice strangely calm amidst the chaos. It has to be turned manually. Sterling looked at the glass. He looked at the wheel. He understood. We can rig a pulley, Gomez started. Use 550 cord. We have 60 seconds, Gomez, Lena said. There's no time for MacGyver expletive. She checked the load in her 1911. She put it on the console. She didn't need it anymore. Get to the helipad, Lena ordered. The list will be violent. If you aren't strapped into the winch basket, you'll be thrown off the deck. No, Sterling said. He stepped forward. I'm the ranking officer. I'm the captain. This is my mission. Lena looked at him. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw the duty. He was a good soldier. He was willing to die, but he was just a soldier. She was the Wraith, and she had a debt to pay. Captain, Lena said softly. The roar of the overpressurized pipes was deafening, a screaming tea kettle the size of a building. Sterling moved toward the door of the accumulator chamber. Take Gomez and go, Chief. That's an order. Lena stepped into his path. She moved with a deceptive lethargy, her hands hanging loose by her sides. The red emergency lighting cast long, dancing shadows across her face, highlighting the scars that mapped her history of violence. You have a family, Sterling? She asked. Sterling blinked, thrown off by the question in the middle of a crisis. Yes, a daughter. She's 5. Go home to her, Lena said. Don't make her an orphan for a piece of metal. I can't let you... Sterling started, his hand reaching for the door handle of the chamber. Lena moved. It wasn't a fight. It was a transaction. She stepped into his personal space, trapping his arm against his chest before he could generate leverage. She drove the palm of her hand into his solar plexus, doubling him over. As he gasped for air, she swept his legs with a precise, fluid motion that utilized his own forward momentum against him. Sterling hit the deck hard. His plate carrier clattered against the grating. Before he could recover, Lena knelt on his chest, pinning him. She didn't strike him. She just looked at him, her gray eyes clear and devoid of hesitation. You're a good officer, Sterling, she said, her voice cutting through the mechanical shrieking of the failing pipes. But you're still thinking like a hero. Heroes die. Professionals get the job done. She stood up and looked at Gomez. The private was frozen, his rifle half raised, unsure whether to aim at the woman who had just taken down his commander. Get him out of here, Gomez, Lena ordered, her tone shifting from conversational to command absolute. Drag him if you have to. Use the winch on the service deck. If you don't leave now, his death is on you. Gomez looked at the pressure gauge. The needle was vibrating against the stop pin. The pipes were starting to bulge, paint flaking off as the steel expanded beyond its yield point. Yes, Chief, Gomez whispered. He slung his rifle and grabbed Sterling by the drag handle of his plate carrier. Sterling struggled weakly. The wind knocked out of him. Kovich, don't. Go! Lena screamed, pointing at the ladder. She waited until they were through the bulkhead door. She waited until she heard the heavy clank, clank, clank of their boots retreating upward, followed by the distant whine of the helicopter winch engaging. Then she was alone. The solitude was absolute. The noise was deafening, but inside her head, it was quiet. The ringing of tinnitus that had plagued her since Syria was gone. The ghosts, the girl in the yellow dress, the men she had killed, were silent. They weren't haunting her anymore. They were witnessing, She walked to the heavy steel door of the accumulator chamber. She opened it. The heat hit her instantly. The air smelled of ozone and hot metal. The massive tank vibrated in front of her, a ticking bomb of hydraulic fluid and compressed gas. The manual dump wheel was located at the base of the tank, painted red, large and cold to the touch. Lena gripped it with both hands. It was rusted tight. T-10 seconds. She thought about her life, the training, the missions. The long, empty nights in cheap apartments, staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was a monster. She realized, with a sudden clarity, that she wasn't a monster. She was a shield, and shields were meant to be broken so that others didn't have to be. For the girl, she whispered. She threw her entire body weight against the wheel. The valve opened. The release of pressure wasn't a hiss. It was a detonation. The 7,000 psi gas expansion ripped the accumulator tank apart from the inside out. The blast wave hit Lena like a physical wall, lifting her off her feet and throwing her backward against the far bulkhead. The world dissolved into white light and crushing noise. Then, the floor dropped away. The entire east leg of the Valkyrie buckled. The massive hydraulic piston, deprived of pressure and shattered by the explosion, collapsed under the weight of the platform. 7,000 tons of steel groaned in agony. The rig lurched violently to the right. It didn't just tilt, it fell. Up on the launch deck, the missile was halfway through its ignition sequence. The onboard gyroscope sensed the catastrophic shift in the horizon, the platform listing past the critical 45-degree angle. The safety protocols, hard-coded into the weapon's logic to prevent a misfire, triggered instantly. Attitude error, abort, abort. The engine cut, but the fuel pumps were already cycling. The sudden stop caused a backflow pressure spike. The missile didn't launch. It detonated inside the tube. A fireball brighter than the sun erupted from the center of the rig, incinerating the biological payload instantly. Lena was sliding. The floor of the subdeck was tilted at a severe angle. Debris, tool chests, loose pipes, shattered glass rained down around her. She scrambled, her hands clawing at the wet grating, but gravity was a relentless enemy. She slid through the shattered remains of the blast door, out onto the external catwalk. The railing was gone, sheared off by the structural failure. Below her, the North Sea raged, a churning cauldron of black water and white foam waiting to swallow the dying giant. She looked up. Through the smoke and the rain, she saw the Black Hawk helicopter lifting off from the helipad, struggling against the wind. A winch cable dangled from it, pulling a basket up into the belly of the aircraft. Sterling and Gomez. They were safe. Good, she breathed. The rig shuddered again as the secondary supports failed. The catwalk tore free from the hull. Lena fell. The fall felt like it lasted forever. She saw the sky, bruised and angry. She saw the burning rig, a dying titan sinking into the deep. Then the cold took her. The impact with the water was like hitting concrete. Darkness swallowed her instantly. The freezing temperature paralyzed her lungs, driving the air from her body. She sank, the weight of her boots and the waterlogged parka dragging her down into the abyss. She didn't fight. She was tired. Her body was broken, burned, and freezing. She let the current take her. It's quiet, she thought. It's finally quiet. Her vision faded to black. The heartbeat in her ears slowed. Thump, thump, then nothing. But the ocean has a way of returning what it doesn't want to keep. A hand grabbed her vest. It wasn't a gentle grip. It was iron, strong, relentless. Lena's eyes snapped open in the darkness. She saw bubbles. She saw a shape. A diver? A search and rescue swimmer? She was being pulled up, toward the light, toward the pain of living. Not yet, the grip seemed to say. Your watch isn't over. The fluorescent lights of the hospital room were too bright. They buzzed with an irritating frequency that grated against Lena's nerves. She was sitting up in bed, her left arm in a cast, her face bandaged. She looked out the window at the gray skyline of Aberdeen. It had been 3 days since the Valkyrie went down. The door opened. Captain Sterling walked in. He was in his dress uniform, looking uncomfortable and stiff. He held a manila folder under his arm. "Chief," he said, nodding respectfully. "Captain," Lena replied. Her voice was raspy, damaged by the seawater and the smoke. "You look like you're going to a funeral." "A debriefing," Sterling corrected. He pulled a chair over and sat down. JSOC just finished their preliminary report. The Valkyrie is a total loss. The biological agent was incinerated in the blast. No contamination detected. And Kozlov? His body was recovered from the wreckage of the lifeboat station. He didn't make it. Lena nodded. It was done. The loop was closed. Sterling opened the folder. The admirals. They wanted to know what happened. Specifically, they wanted to know who took the shot on the machine gunner and who rigged the accumulator. Lena looked at him. This was the moment. The identity reveal had happened on the rig, but now it was about the official record. If she was named, her quiet life was over. The media, the inquiries, the fame she despised, it would all come crashing back. "What did you tell them?" she asked. Sterling pulled out a single sheet of paper from the folder. It was the after-action report. "I told them that the operation was successful due to the assistance of a civilian structural engineer on site," Sterling read. "She provided critical schematics and advice on the rig's vulnerabilities. Her name is Lena Kovic, civilian contractor." He looked up at her. "I left out the part about the XM 2010. I left out the CQC. I left out the Master Chief." Lena exhaled, a long, slow breath. "Why?" "Because you retired, Chief," Sterling said softly. "You walked away. You didn't want the war. I figured you earned the right to stay anonymous." He placed a small object on the bedside table. It wasn't a medal. It was a single, spent and .300 Winchester Magnum casing. "The boys found this on the deck before we lifted off," Sterling said. "Thought you might want it." Lena picked up the brass casing. It was cold, heavy. A souvenir of the moment she broke her vow to save his life. "Thank you, Captain," she said. Sterling stood up. He saluted, a sharp, crisp Ranger salute. It wasn't for a civilian. It was for a superior officer. "We're shipping out tomorrow," he said. "If you ever need anything, the Rangers owe you a debt." "Just make sure your men know how to read the wind," Lena said, a faint smile touching her lips. Sterling laughed. "Yes, ma'am." He left the room. Lena looked at the casing. Then she looked at the reflection in the window. The civilian engineer looked back at her. But behind the eyes, the wraith was still there. Sleeping, waiting. She wasn't a victim of the system. She wasn't a hero of the state. She was the silent variable that balanced the equation. She picked up the remote and turned off the TV. The silence in the room was perfect.